was Labor Day 1950. My dad, my brother and I had just come back toward our house in Montpelier, Idaho from a day putting up hay on the farm. The rest of our family was at home, and my oldest brother had been to football practice. As we drove up, in front of our house was a brand new 1950 Cadillac hearse backed into our front porch. Now in Montpelier, they didn't have an ambulance, so the hearse doubled as an ambulance, and it had a siren and lights on top, and we just had no idea what was happening. My dad jumped out just as they were putting my oldest brother Carl into the back of the hearse on a gurney. My mother was in tears, and we were informed that he had been diagnosed with polio, and they were going to take him post-haste to Pocatello, to St. Anthony's Hospital, which had been designated as the polio hospital. There'd already been some people in Bear Lake die that year, that fall actually, from polio. There were other cases, and suddenly my little young mind, I was just barely turned 9, turned to an iron lung. I just contemplated what you'd seen in the Weekly Reader, the magazine, of my brother being confined in that iron lung, and if it wasn't the iron lung, then the common thing that you knew about was paralysis, usually from the waist down, and then I visualized him with crutches. And I mean, he was a big, strong guy, but it was just suddenly to have him wiped out that way. And then while they were driving away, I started thinking about the March of Dimes image and President Roosevelt, and how, although people talked about Roosevelt never liking to be filmed with his crutches or his braces or a wheelchair, the pictures of him with children were pretty common. And so then my dad came back and he just said, let's go do the chores. So we went down and milked the cows. But when we came back to our house, on that same front door on the front porch was a quarantine sign, which said the date, it didn't have an ending date, but on our house we were quarantined. And so for the next approximately 3-4 weeks, as I remember, I didn't leave the house. I think my brother may have gone with Dad early in the morning to help milk, but I did not leave the house. And we waited and waited to try to figure out exactly what was going on with Carl, and we found out that his polio had kind of focused on his throat, and his vocal cords had been paralyzed, and he'd have to learn to speak again, but pretty soon he was on his way home. Now, my personal story is one of many, many stories that took place during the 1950s. This chart indicates a huge spike in polio right during and right after World War I. President Roosevelt was attacked in 1921, but you can see from the chart that from the World War II on, it gradually grew, and it hit an apex in 1952 where there were literally like 3,400 or 3,600 deaths, and then it gradually went down. How this affected families, how this affected people, other children were quarantined if a family member had it, but for the most part, we knew that people were working on polio. And then about 1954, they announced that Dr. Jonas Salk, after first experimenting even with some of his children, was able to have a vaccination that they felt comfortable in vaccinating the country. And so for the next year, through 1955, after that apex in 52, there was a gradual reduction, and then later the Sabin sugar cube thing came in, and so you can see by 1960, right after 1960, it had basically been eradicated. We just had one blimp in our personal life In 1956, one of my very best friends, again, it was during football season, it always seemed to come in the fall of the year, he suddenly just couldn't get out of bed, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. They took him up to Boise where they did water therapy, and he was able to come back by January, and then, but again, he was affected pretty dramatically with the paralysis of his legs that he gradually fought back and got the use of. But they later found out through research that there was a bad batch of either one of the vaccines or maybe one of the initial sugar cubes. I think it was more a vaccine. And so it was something that you feared as a child. Every fall, you know, they'd restrict you from swimming, they'd restrict certain uses. But in reality, it had a dramatic effect on many, many lives. And for us, polio was, for a time, a way of life.